Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Respected viewers, welcome to the second episode of Thursday Night Talk with myself as your host, Sheikh Mohammed Abbas Panju. Tonight we're joined by a panel of elite guests, each of them professionals within their respected field, as we come forward and discuss the topic on social media and mental health. The underlining statement for the night, which we hope to discuss today with our panel, is the relationship between social media and mental health. Does excessive use or any use of social media for that instance contribute to mental illness? Joining me in our panel of experts today, from the very far right hand side to me, we have Dr. Hassanein Al-Ta'ir. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Doctor.
Thank you.
The doctor has some outstanding, if not to say the least, never-ending accolades with him, mashallah. He is he's a consultant forensic psychiatrist who's graduated with a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery. He holds membership of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He is also the lead for the Oxpic project, which provides distant learning opportunities to Iraqi psychiatrists. He is also the secretary of the British Arab Psychiatric Association, and he is also currently the chairman of the Iraqi Mental Health Forum. Just a few of the accolades that we have by Dr. Hassanein. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Close to me on my right-hand side, we have Brother Rida Mahdi. He is the creative director of Dark Falcon Productions. He has worked for over 10 years in the media industry, covering areas of creative, charitable, and corporate projects. It's a pleasure to have you here today, sir. On my left-hand side, we go back a long time.
Yes, we
from
do.
Hajj.
From Hajj,
Alhamdulillah
and
wa
Karbala.
shukr. And Karbala, of course, Jannah on earth.
Inshallah.
It's an honor for me to have Dr. Mohammed Sulaiman. He runs the Help You to Help You counseling services. As integrative counselors, they combine multicultural, spiritual, humanistic, and psychodynamic approaches in their institution as they tackle mental health challenges. They are primarily based in London, but their services are available globally. Habibi Mohammed, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Too,
Thank you for joining us. Gentlemen, for tonight, as we discuss the issue of social media and mental health, as is stipulated within the books of logic, before we delve into any discussion, we're going to define the parameters of both these fields, social media and mental health. We'll define both these institutes or both these concepts, and this way we have a parameter for our discussion and we can move forward from there. Beginning with you, Haji Rida Mahdi, working within the field of media. To make this clear for myself, for the panel, and for our viewers, the parameters of our discussion, a brief definition of what you would consider social media.
I think the concept or definition of social media is quite vast. I don't think it's something that can be defined as simple as certain parameters, but more so I think it's more defined by the general concept of people having the ability to put out information and for it to be received and responded to. I think that's probably the clearest definition I can, in my experience, define what social media is. Obviously, the outlets of that are numerous, from Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth. But I think it initially derives from the point that people want to put out content of their own, and they want that content responded to. And I think that's the most broadest kind of parameter that could be set for what social media really is.
So could you see the leaning idea and the lead idea as we revolutionize ourselves in technology? The entire concept is based on the ability to share information globally at the fastest time possible.
I mean, do you say that's an aim? Is that an objective, is what you're saying?
An objective, or perhaps maybe the goal behind the institutions?
No, I wouldn't say that sharing information in the fastest time possible is the aim of social media. I would say it's the user experience. Because if you think about it, When people say that they want to post something up at a specific date and they delay or defer the instant information or instant release of that information, it generates more curiosity.
Sure.
So the release of instant information isn't necessarily the goal of social media. Social media is more to generate a user experience where more people are involved.
Of course.
So if you, for example, look at the history of social media, one of the oldest social media sites was a site called Friendster, and that was taken over by MySpace. But MySpace was beaten by Facebook simply to the fact that Facebook's user interface was more accepting to the general public, and that they could post more content, and there was different ways for them to be on the website for longer.
Of course.
So I think that the key thing here for a most successful element of social media, or where social media is looking to go, is that if they can get more people interested, there'll be more people connected.
Sure.
And then whichever rate you spread the information, you have a big enough base. I mean, obviously, this is the thing, because it's so vast, it depends on what field you're in. But I'd say probably the biggest social media outlet that we have right now, it'd be probably Facebook, Instagram. I mean, you could possibly define WhatsApp as social media as well. It's massively used. You know, LinkedIn. If you're more on the business side of things, for example, if it's music, it'd probably be SoundCloud.
Sure.
But this is the beauty of what social media, well, if you define it as a beauty, is that there's so many small hubs for so many small different industries. But I'd say Facebook is probably by far the largest.
And all these different outlets then come under the umbrella
of social media.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rida. Moving on to you, Dr. Hassanain. Within your field of expertise, again, there is a lot of ignorance when it comes to understanding mental health and just the definition of mental health. Within this very vast field, would you be kind enough to enlighten us on what you would define as mental health?
Thank you for the question. I mean, it's a very big topic, as you said. This is a vast topic. So mental health is mental well-being, feeling happy and content with your life without any stresses, without any worries. The contrary to that is mental illness, and it's a spectrum of disorders from anxiety, depression to the more severe, like psychosis, schizophrenia, and bipolar manic depression. And it's a spectrum. Also, autistic and neurodevelopmental disorders come to play across that spectrum. Sure. And addiction problems, alcohol misuse, substance misuse, this is also part of mental disorders, personality disorders. It's a big topic, and there are something like, if we're talking about specifics, maybe around 90 or 100 subtypes of mental disorders.
So you could categorize mental illness having 90 to 100 categories. Each one would perhaps need a set of expertise within that. You know, having said this, when it comes to mental health, I mean, you stated over here it's about mental well-being, right? Within your field, within the field of experts, who actually makes this definition of well-being? I mean, the definition of well-being, what could be defined as well-being perhaps to person X would not necessarily apply to person Y. So what are the mediums used to have a standard benchmark that would apply as mental well-being to everybody?
Correct, yeah. It's a slightly complicated question, but the simple answer to it is, so being healthy, being functioning, doing your job, doing your studies, interacting normally with your family, with the community, I would classify this as mental well-being or healthy life. What might make you happy is definitely different to what makes you or other people happy.
Sure.
And this is, again, a spectrum. If there are disturbances happening in your social functioning or in anyone's social functioning, in their academic studies, at their employment, with their family, there might be a nucleus or a start of a mental health problem, which could be anything from simple anxiety to a bit of depression to a more severe, end of the spectrum of mental disorders.
Understood. Moving on to you, Haji Mohammed, within your field, I mean, offering counseling services over here in London, would you be kind enough to educate us on some of the most common mental health issues that you see our communities, the youth over here in London and perhaps even globally? Is there a common trend? Is there some common category which is perhaps more mashhoor, if you could say, the more common problem that you deal with?
Well, as well as being involved in Help You counseling services, I also run a charity called Youth Empowerment Solutions, and that's based in Brixton, in South London. And the common problem we have there, because our organization, our agency is around anti-gangs, guns, knives, and anti-radicalization. That's what we do a lot of work around. But we find that the common thread with these young people who express or show these particular symptoms or this particular behavior, destructive self-behavior, is low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem.
Yeah, they have a very low self-esteem. And this leads to this self-destructive behavior, around depressive behavior, lethargy, inability to, their attention span is very short. They're very quick to anger, to violence.
Right.
So the issues are around them, their perception of their ideal self, or the perception of a positive self-image, is something that they lack terribly. So they don't feel adequate enough, because they're constantly bombarded with images on social media around perfection of the body, how someone should be, how one should look, how, am I going to get likes for my Instagram page, constantly looking for likes.
Right.
So they believe that this social media, this particular platform, will give them a sense of themselves, a good feeling of themselves, because they want to feel good, but then they're not feeling good because they realize they can't live up to the images that sometimes they post. So for example, they're always going to post pictures of themselves looking fantastic.
Right.
But to be constantly looking fantastic, that in itself would create a neurosis.
Of course.
And an anxiety, yeah.
And you can imagine you've gone through all the effort to try and look what we would say in the local lingo. You go through all the effort to look buff, and you'll be disappointed. You'll be disappointed. I mean, for a dinosaur, it's not bad.
You're not that much of a dinosaur.
In it. So you can imagine that a person's gone through quite a bit of effort to look buff, to look really good, and to meet up to the expectation of what is beautiful or what is handsome, and then the response and the likes is perhaps not what he would expect.
Exactly.
I can kind of relate to that. You can come up and you can be on a show, you can deliver a lecture, and you think you've done a really good job, and you're disappointed when the views are not that much.
And these are people, and so what it is that, as the brother was saying, because you're putting yourself out there for this feedback, for this instant gratification of, I want to feel good about myself, and then some troll or somebody who just maliciously would just say things just to destroy, just to pull you down. It actually affects people. People will delete their social media because they've had negative views.
Sure.
But then they take that, the problem is that then they take that frustration, that anger out in the real society.
Right.
In terms of criminal behavior, destructive behavior, at school or colleges or in their family, because there's no outlook for them to, they don't realize that they're actually having a mental health issue.
Understood. If I was just to build on your analysis, building on Dr. Mohammed's analysis, Dr. Hassanein, we've pointed a root cause being low self-esteem that leads towards destructive behavior. Again, within your field of expertise, the root causes of low self-esteem, what would we identify when it comes to low self-esteem? Is it the family? Is it the city? Is it the media? Is it a combination of all this? And number two, what is the solution going forward for this? Do we need to have more government-funded projects for this? Do we need to have more Hussainiyas, more mosques getting involved, faith-based institutions? What's your take on this?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think let's divide the answer into two. So self-esteem and why, or low self-esteem, why it happens.
Right.
Technically, low self-esteem is not a mental illness, or it's not a mental disorder, but it's part of a global picture of a mental disorder. So low self-esteem could be seen in anxiety, could be seen in people who are depressed, could be seen in people who have personality difficulties and some psychological difficulties.
Sure.
What's the root cause? What's the stem of that? It originates from sometimes genetic factors, or family factors, and also
genetic factors as well.
Yeah,
Could you just briefly enlighten me on how it could be genetically?
So more people are more, for example, some people are more susceptible to have depression or anxiety or certain mental disorders because that specific mental disorder runs in their family.
Right.
So that will make anyone, well, if I have a family history of depression, for example, I'm more likely to have depression compared to anybody else in the public.
Sure.
And a part of the global picture of depression is having a low self-esteem or low self-confidence. And that's complicated by family stressors, by environmental stressors, maybe exposure to, criminal behaviors or, radicalization or any kind of influence by, negative peers or substance misuse. All of these combinations and psychosocial stresses, we call them,
right,
could augment that picture and could make someone from having simply a low self-esteem into a more profound mental disorder, or maybe it might present in the most extreme form, whether it might end up in suicide, homicide, or other criminal activity. Does that make sense?
Of course,
yeah.
Of course.
How we target that, how we address that, again, it's a global effort, I would say. So,
sure,
raising the awareness about mental disorders, there is a big stigma all over the world. And mainly in developing countries, and mainly in many communities, right, when they see mental illness as a sign of weakness and that you shouldn't ask for help. And the problem is, for example, more in men compared to women. There is more awareness nowadays, maybe in the last 20 or 15 years, people are more aware of mental disorders and how we address them.
Of course.
So how we address them, how we manage them, this is a combination of treatment, medications, tablets,
right,
talking therapy, counseling, definitely social support through schools, mosques, cultural centers,
right,
and family support.
Sure. How high up is mental health on government priority?
In the last few years, it is getting better in some. Well, I think it's a sensitive topic compared to physical health. Mental health is still underfunded by the government.
Right.
And sadly, this has been the case for some time now. There is now more awareness that mental health issues exist and that we need funding, and that no physical health without mental health.
And this is under the 90 to 100 categories that you have identified potentially come under mental health.
Under mental health, yeah. So there are 10 big categories, and within each category there are about 10 or 9 subcategories. So we're talking about 90 to 100 mental disorders.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. Phenomenal. I mean, more funding is required to staff in terms of staffing, in terms of skills, building capacity, and and social support for people with mental disorders.
Of course, it's fantastic insight into this. Rida, coming to you, I mean, you being within the field of media, you've got a solid understanding of social media. You're inside this field. What would you say, your take, in the sense that people within this, I mean, when we're analyzing the fact that you have got people, as the doctor mentioned over here, who have got low self-esteem, going out, for example, putting pictures of themselves within a public space, becoming a target for some sort of vulnerability. Is that truly the case? Is it almost everybody who's on social media, if I go and put myself a buff picture, does it show that I've got a little bit of low self-esteem issues?
I mean, obviously to question the intention of millions and millions of subscribers or posters or bloggers is an immense one.
Generalization isn't in its place.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as the doctor kind of mentioned a very valid point when he was discussing about the issues of self-esteem, specifically about that issue, was that there are certain indicators of that. Some may be genetic, some may be family-based, some may be peer-based. So you have to understand that if children or individuals are already harboring that, it only gets amplified by using a bigger tool.
Right.
And that's all social media, in my opinion, is. It's a tool. For example, if you take the analogy of a car has killed millions of people. How many car crashes have you heard of? How many people have lost limbs or had their lives destroyed because someone's been hit in a car? But cars have also taken pregnant mothers to the hospital to deliver babies.
100%.
Cars have saved old people when they were in a state where they needed to get to the hospital.
Sure. So it comes, it literally boils down to how you use the social media. I'm going to make a comment here just before we take a question from the audience. I have an indication that we have a question coming up. But let me just ask you this. Look, you drew an analogy with cars, right? You have a minimum, or you've got restrictions and you've got criterias. There's an examination that you need to do. You need to be of a certain age. You get your driver's license, and then you're allowed to be on the road for a certain amount of time. You're a learner. You need to be with an adult, so on and so forth. So, you know, drawing on that same analogy within the social media industry, if we are starting to recognize that it's tied in and there is a big correlation between people using social media and suffering from mental health, there's a bit of a research that was published not far long ago, and if I'm not mistaken, it was from the University of Pittsburgh, where it said close to 70% of the sample that was analyzed for their statistics, close to 70% of youth between 8th grade and 12th grade suffered from some sort of depression because of the extent or because of the way in which they use social media. So coming back over here is that if you were to draw the analogy that social media is like a tool, right? Or like any sort of a vehicle, depending on how you use it, but you find that there are also legal conditions and prerequisites that a person should meet before he's allowed to be on the road. Do you think we need legal intervention when it comes to social media?
Social media, there are very loosely applied already.
Sure. As an expert, being within the industry, is there any form of legality legislation in regards to how it can be controlled from either the user end or the application end?
Obviously, there's massive amounts of legislation that are happening. For example, if you look at YouTube with Paul Logan recently, with certain vloggers doing things which the viewership has defined as illegal, or maybe the censorship department within YouTube find not accessible, but or not usable, they would have cut that out, or they have made certain rules and regulations for that. I mean, there's an age limit to Instagram, for example. What's
the age limit, just for the record?
I believe it's something in the region of between 12 to 15.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, you're going to say, though, but like a child can't drive a car, so then why should they be allowed to use Instagram? But once again, for example, if you're sitting with a child and you're doing a DIY project, you'd use a screwdriver or maybe a power drill. But it all comes down to the basis of how that child is nurtured before they use the tool. And I think that gets kind of lost in all of this when we're saying, oh, this child has posted X amount of stuff up on Instagram, so it must be so terrible. But why was that child allowed access to that place in the first place? Where was the mother? Where was the father? Where was the family unit educating this child to say, look, you're going to have to deal with life. There are people out there that are going to be better than you. There are people out there that are going to be smarter than you. And this is how you engaged with certain people. Instead of kind of planting a tablet in front of a 3-year-old and hoping to God that he'll develop some amazing morality, so when he gets to social media level, then he posts something up and gets completely hounded.
Right.
And now we're dealing with the problem.
Of course.
But the problem in its origin was that the root was never strong.
So family structure is basically what you're saying. Tell me your upbringing within the household in how to deal with the social media. Fantastic. Floor questions is open to the floor and to the audience. I had a bit of a signal that we have a question in.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, sister.
Great show, mashallah. I wanted to say, as Muslims, I feel that we get slaughtered by the media, especially social media. I mean,
I'm so sorry. You'll need to speak just a bit louder.
Sure.
Sorry.
As Muslims, I feel that we get slaughtered by social media, well, in the media as well, actually. And I feel that our community has a problem with creating a different narrative. And I was wondering, which does affect our mental health, like most millennials' mental health. For example, you get Muslim girls taking off their headscarves and, getting pushed into certain things because, let's be honest, social media paints a picture that Muslims are a bit weird. I mean, if we're not exploding left, right and centre, we're doing something else, that's odd. And it would be lovely if, as Muslims, we created a different narrative. And I was wondering, in relation to mental health, what could our community do and what could Muslims working in social media do to sort of change that narrative and kind of make us as a community look better in the eyes of everyone else?
Sure. Wow, it's a deep question, a comment and a question at the same time. Super. So I think the root, if I understand over here, is inferiority complex. So beginning with yourself, Dr. Mohammed, inferiority complex, which is fueled by social media, particularly within the Muslim community. What's your take on this?
Well, because I do a lot of work around anti-radicalization,
Yes.
this is right up my street in a way, because
Right.
2 days ago I was on Google TV, and I was invited by the mayor to his to a fund that Google and the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, are working on to deal with this very issue of how do you create a counter narrative. I hate to say the word, but a radical counter narrative to the negative images of Muslims in the community, and how you counter the extremists actually exploiting that feeling of vulnerability and that feeling that Muslims have not responding well to being put in a very negative light. So some of the things that we were discussing at this conference, the mayor's conference, as well as when I was on the television with the interviewer, was looking at ways of creating high, kind of glossy, but very important and images that similarly capture the imagination of Muslims and help to put them in a positive light. So if someone like Donald Trump tweets horrendous Islamophobic, disgusting statements about Muslims, which we know are wrong, that the Muslims, we have a media presence that can quickly counter it and come with a counter narrative that is effectively nullifies that very negative image. But we are slow on the ball. We are behind at the moment. And I think because there is evidence, and I've got to say this, there is clear evidence that social media can lead to depression and suicide. Many, many studies have done proved this. It's beyond shadow of a doubt. So what we shouldn't do is perhaps, I know what the brother was talking about a car analogy, probably not the best one, but I think that there's two things here. There is like the fact that social media is affecting Muslim youth and is creating it is helping to add to a negative self-perception. A lot of young Muslims, I work in my community, many of the Muslims who are involved in gang crime is Muslims. You know, many of them who are involved in the street criminal life are Muslims, and they're heavy into social media. So there's two things here. One of them is, yes, we need a presence in social media as Muslims. We need to be effective. We need to counter the radical extremist ideology and also that of right-wing extremist groups. And even if the Prime Minister of this country says Muslim women are pillar boxes, we need to be able to counter that. But at the same time, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that social media, as it stands at the moment, and in terms of young Muslim self-esteem, how Muslim sisters as well, how they're viewing themselves, it's attacking them and it's making them feel inadequate. And at the moment, it's not helping, because as Brother Reza said, it's not being monitored by the parents, not by the cultural centres. And I think that our parents and the cultural centres are naive.
Legislation as well?
Legislation can only work in terms of if there is a will for it. You can pass all the laws you want, but if people are not going to adhere to them, what's the point? So you have to, as the brother said, start at home in a way, but at the same time, be really honest. Because if you're on your phone all the time, your child can't get your attention, you know, you give your child a tablet as a babysitter because it's easier to stop it from crying, you know, and you're doing what you're doing. Well, what are you telling the child then? You're telling your child it's okay. So you 100%. Yourself are not emotionally you're not available for the emotional well-being and the mental health of your child. What do you expect? Well, social media will say, fine, you're not doing it. Well, I'm stepping in, I'm doing it for you. I'll do your job.
There you go. And this is why we strongly believe that when it comes to the process of education and rectifying the mess within which we exist in the community, the starting point within this hierarchy has to be the parents.
Yes.
The importance that is given to a family structure and the importance to carrying out, your motherly or your fatherly role.
Can I just add quickly on that as well? Brother Reda off air made an excellent point in which we talked about the importance of spirituality as well. The importance that religion can play in this, a spiritual.
Of course.
Well, it doesn't matter what religion, but even, this is in counseling, because counseling is essentially, because of Freudian concepts, it's an atheistic kind of model. But at the same time, there has to be a spiritual nature to things.
100%. I agree with you. There has to be a faith-based perspective towards this. There's tons of things that I want to build based on what Dr. Mohammed has said, and particularly dig into this with Dr. Hassanain and with Rida. Hopefully after the break we'll reconvene and carry off from the points that have been built by Dr. Mohammed. Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the second segment of Thursday Night Talk with our esteemed guests. And just before we broke for break, we had a fantastic discussion going on with Dr. Mohammed in regards to mental health issues and how social media is contributing towards this within our local communities. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to pick on over here, and I want to direct this part of the conversation or the discussion with Dr. Hassanain. I mean, from an analysis that has been made by Dr. Mohammed over here, working with the youth inside of London, we're starting to see that, when it comes to violence on the streets, we cannot deny that we've got a large number of Muslims, number one, that are involved within violence. So the fact that they are Muslim, and then the fact that social media in its culture perhaps triggers, if not encourages, some sort of this violent type of behavior. When it comes to understanding the mechanics what's the psychology behind this? How do you draw the connections? Is it just coincidence that it's Muslims and violence, or violence and social media?
It's a big topic. People spend years to study this and specialize in this field. I mean, violence and dealing with people who have a history of offending and mental health issues is my specialty, and this is what I do on a daily basis.
Sure.
It's a very complicated subject, and as I said, there are multiple backgrounds, multiple theories to it.
Right.
Genetic, chemical changes, psychological changes, family issues. I think we all acknowledge that there is a lot of negative publicity about Muslims being involved in violent crimes and terrorist attacks. I think the onus is on us, is on the Muslim community,
right,
to portray the better picture, to portray Islam and Muslim people in a more positive way, and also mention some good success stories and mention a lot of positive things about
100%.
History and culture, and from many decades ago. There are some theories, there is some evidence that actually mental illness exists more commonly in people who are second generation migrants, let's call it. Not necessarily Muslims, but all backgrounds.
Second generation migrants?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and people have studied this a lot. People think, researchers thought that maybe the second generation migrants of any community, Black, African, Arab, Asian, East European, Caribbean,
right,
they live in this country and they face some kind of dilemma between either identifying with their origins and their home countries, and also identifying with the local community, with the
right,
local, with their friends and
sure,
schoolmates. So that triggers some kind of cognitive dissonance, or some kind of cognitive distortion, we call it. Some psychological mechanisms play in the mind and make people more vulnerable and more susceptible to mental illness. If people are faced with the wrong crowds, if people are faced with substance misuse, if they are mixing with the wrong peers, they are definitely more susceptible to mental illness, and they are susceptible to violence and criminal activity. And sadly, the media is not on our side. Yeah, the media portrays the negative aspects of this.
Of course, with all that negativity that has been put inside, I tend to believe that there is some element of truth. Has social media played a role in the radicalization of youth? That has then led, this radical behavior has then led to violence, whether it's joining extremist groups or Daesh or ISIS or anything of that sort?
I mean, sadly, the answer is yes. And I see people on regular basis who were radicalized, who were young, vulnerable people of all backgrounds. I mean, I recently saw an Italian chap who came to this country 5 years ago, and he was radicalized by meeting a group of, I would say, extremist people. And he went to the social media, to WhatsApp and Facebook groups, and he was sending pictures and programs to other people all over the world about how to create a weapon or how to, assault people. And I mean, this is only a recent example I can think of, but there are hundreds of people with
violence that is, and it's unfortunate. You can imagine if a person's already mentally not stable, and then faith, which can be a very powerful weapon, faith is then used to justify violence.
Correct.
I mean, and this is why it is so important, and I can't even begin to, say how blessed we are within the school of Ahlul Bayt, that we take pride in the sense that the Shia school of thought is built on the principles of non-violence. And I think the more and more the Muslim youth come to understand this message, violence no more becomes appealing, whether it is through social media or any other way. And you look at the greatest example that we have, Sayyid al-Shuhada Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein, on the day of Ashura in Karbala, surrounded by historical reports that says the enemies are anywhere between 40,000 to 100,000. He's surrounded, under siege. His family's been denied food and water for 3 days. On that day of Ashura, right, when he comes out after the Salatul Fajr, he tells his companions, Akrahu an abda bil harb. Yani, I despise starting the war. This is a man who's being persecuted. This is a man who's under siege. Yet when his companions say, we have the right to self-defense, he says, I despise and I hate the one to be the first one to shoot this arrow. Sending a strong message that within the school of Ahlul Bayt, violence in that sense is not justified in any means or forms. And we have, within the culture of Ahlul Bayt, the importance when it comes to non-violence. And I think this is an important part to elaborate on as well. We have a question in the crowd, and I'm just going to put that on a short hold. Come back to Rida over here. Again, what Dr. Mohammed stated and what Dr. Hassanein has stated, when it comes to the negative image of Muslims within the media, unfortunately, the media is against us. Now, before I come to you, let me just put this out, Bain al-Qawsayn over here. This is perhaps why we take a lot of pride at Imam Hussein Media Group, being a Shia media outlet that gives us a voice within a mainstream platform to come out and give the people the opportunity to have access to the correct narrative. This is the primary importance, just so that you know, and again for the record, it's always good to state this. Imam Hussein Media Group broadcasts in 5 different languages: Farsi, Arabic, English, Urdu, Turkish, and we have our own independent news agency as well. So alhamdulillah, for all our viewers who follow us on all the different languages, alhamdulillah wa shukr. Yes, sir?
Jamaican patois.
Jamaican coming up as well, inshallah.
Jamaicans are Muslim.
Ahsantum, inshallah. As I get to the question on the crowd, Rida, again, being within the field of media, what do you think needs to be done for a greater Shia presence within the media industry?
Before I jump into that question, just one point that I think the brother mentioned, that I think kind of needs to be addressed, and something that the doctor mentioned, which I think in principle we all agree in regards to the awareness, that there needs to be a level of awareness, whether it's to do with mental health, whether it's to do with social media. But I do feel that a lot of the times the general public love to kind of scapegoat or just point the finger at at an issue and say that that's the problem. I mean, you mentioned, like, for example, social media is proven that, X amount of percentages is linked to mental health issues. So is food, but we still eat food.
Sure.
So I don't think by pointing at the tool is the problem. I think by pointing at the problem is the issue. And I think that the doctor mentioned it very eloquently.
The tool is the problem.
But I think identity
The tool
is the
or how the tool is used?
The tool itself is the problem. and it's a complexity of also with how you access it. But these, the citations I can quote, qualified psychotherapists, and many of them have actually said, don't use it. Now, I'm not taking their extreme stance, but they've actually, lots of people are coming out and saying, you should tell your children to get rid of this thing, because what's happening is young people are validating themselves by how other people see them, and it's through a virtual reality of false narrative.
But don't you see that the issue here isn't the Instagram?
I wouldn't be naive as to say that is the problem as such. But the fact is, when I'm in the charity I run, when I see young people dying or committing atrocities and posting it on social media and boasting about it, they could be in a prison cell and they could be raping another person and they post it. Unfortunately, I don't have the delicacy that you may have to sit back and think, oh well, is it violence that creates it, or is it the creation of the violence that does it? I haven't got that.
Naturally, I'm not in a position to judge the action. Obviously, the action is horrific and it needs to be worked upon. But I think that the core principle here, that if we're working on the issue here is identity. Why does this individual believe that he's able to do this? Why does he want to amplify that message? As the doctor said, it was second generation people suffered from massive amounts of mental issues based on a lack of identity because they moved from one country to another country and they couldn't affiliate themselves.
You could simply be narcissistic. You don't have to necessarily have a mental health issue. You could just be, I just like violence, I'm attracted to violence, and I'm a narcissistic person. My id and my ego are not fully developed, so I just like the idea of violence, and the young people I work with are feral like that.
I think
they like it because they can do it, because it is sexy. It is violence is what they see on the TV. They see their government going to war. There's no diplomacy.
But you're talking about something that's innate. It's not a social media tool that's bringing them out. I'm not saying it doesn't amplify it. It does. It possibly does amplify it. I don't disagree with that.
I think we have
but it's not
something
the
over
origin
here.
of it. It's not the origin of the problem. The origin of the problem needs to be sorted. If you cut the source off, is a family structure, is identity, is having necessary governmental organizations put in place like what you're doing. You are part of the solution. But regardless if you remove Instagram from the situation, there's still going to be murders, there's still going to be rapes, there's still going to be theft. So what you're doing is the solution.
It's a fantastic discussion over here on whether it's the tool that's the issue or the manner in which the tool's been used. Doctor, you want to jump in, and we have a pressing question as well.
It's the misuse of the tool, so it's not the tool. I mean, 50 years ago, we didn't have social media. We still had crimes, rape, violence, murder, everything.
Sure.
So it's the misuse of the tool rather than the tool itself.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify one thing, it's nobody is born violent. Nobody is born with a narcissistic or antisocial trait, but he develops and he grows up in that criminal or criminogenic way.
This is something that we have which is faith-based as well. Just to elaborate on this, and we come to the crowd, we have a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, where, to paraphrase it, he says that every child is born to be a Muslim.
Yes, on the fitra.
Now, what is, of course, on the fitrah, what is understood is every person is born, without going into the accurate detail of Muslim, but what is also understood within that definition of Muslim, everyone is born with this fitrah, this innate feeling towards absolute goodness. Because being a Muslim means towards absolute goodness. You have your psychological, you have your faith, your belief system, and then you have your action. So every human being is born with that default setting of goodness. And then what changes him is his environment. So whether it is the social media that he's exposed to, how he's using it, whether it's the actual tool or how the tool's being used, whether it's the family structure, whether it is the social structure, the environment in which he exists, all of this plays a part in shaping the personality of a person. And I don't think of any given individual, things or these issues, when it comes to coming down to finding out the root cause of mental health or the root cause of why people behave in a particular manner within social media, I don't think it can be isolated to any single reason. You've got multiple complex factors, and I think the more we discuss this, the more we come to realize it. And I can imagine, Dr. Mohammed, it's heartbreaking when you have people who you have dealt with, or people who are coming to you for counseling because one of their peers has committed suicide. Having said this, question from the crowd that we would like to take up.
Hello. What
Salam
sort of
alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Inshallah you're well. What sort of things can we teach the youth to use social media in the right way? Like, how can they use it in the correct way?
So, in terms of a parent, what does the parent need to do while educating? If I'm going to gift my kid,
community centers,
sure,
if they want to solve the issue, because we can clearly see that it's making youth maybe violent or aggressive. How can we guide them in the right direction?
Self-esteem. Don't forget, brother, this is perhaps one of the biggest things. When you have low self-esteem, inferiority complex, it's those symptoms that to the apparent eye go unseen, but the person suffering from the inside until it's way too late. But it's a fantastic question. Doctor, one practical example, and we'll come to you for a second practical example as well. One practical example that you think our local mosques or Hussainiyas can implement when it comes to
the use of social media. I think raising the awareness of the positive aspects of using social media. The social media is huge, is massive. There are lots of, for example, educational sites, medical sites, treatment where treatment platforms where you meet with a professional or you meet with an educator, or like with LinkedIn, you could apply for jobs and get employment opportunities. So using social media in a structured and a constructive way. There is another element to that. So I think the police, the government maybe needs to ban certain platforms and certain websites, and they do that a lot with, for example, child or pornography and radicalization websites. So if there is a ban or a filter on using these specific negative platforms, I think this is the other practical
in
example.
terms of legislation.
Yeah.
I've got something that I'd like to add on to this, but I'm going to let our panel of experts come in with their opinion on this. So Dr. Hasnain's of the opinion that we need to have a strategy of education, and this education is supposed to revolve around the constructive use of social media from a young age.
Correct.
Fantastic. In addition to legislation that needs to be put in from the government side. Dr. Mohammed, your take?
Yeah, I would agree with the doctor wholeheartedly. I think that, and also what Brother Reza was saying, it starts in the home. So the idea with the young people, don't just give them these tablets and easy access social media.
So education for the parents is perhaps even more important than the education of the youth.
Because excuse me. All right. Hello. Yeah, the education of the parents is key, because usually the first time a child gets introduced to social media will be from the parents.
Right.
Now, we know that children are losing sleep. They don't know when to switch off. So if the parents sit with their child and actually say, look, there's some good that can come out of this, but there's also negatives. It's a bit like alcohol in the Quran. It's good in it, but then it's the bad outweighing the good.
Of course.
Yeah. So if you educate your child in a positive way, which is real relationships are formed by physical connections, meeting real people, going out and looking at the wonderment of Allah's creation, and actually getting in touch with your real self, not with an image through a virtual reality platform. So things like sleep deprivation and children not learning to switch off, eating at the family table, having no tablets at the family table, the parents themselves not on the tablet or not constantly on platforms themselves on WhatsApp, and spending time with their child, engaging with their child, taking their child out to the park for walks, even a night walk with a torch, going out with your child, playing Scrabble with your child.
Of course.
Actually engaging your child. So the child's self-worth is based around the parents, based around the faith of the parents, the culture of the parents. You're consistently edifying the child to understand and the child's feeling, because you're giving it this kind of love, constant love and attention that the child needs. Then the child slowly developing understanding that real relationships are formed and real bonds are made outside of this social media platform.
100%. I agree with you, because to a great extent, a lot of the vulnerable people who get taken advantage of over social media is because they lack that sense of belongingness. They're lacking recipiency in love.
The key word in the gangs of the young people I work with, the culture of a fam and blood. So the Arab, Asian, black and white kids, they don't see religion, they just see fam. They call each other fam and blood. So they're looking for a family. They're looking for that connection that they feel they're not getting if they're second generation or they're not understood by their parents.
Right.
Because they speak a language different to their parents. They walk a different way to their parents.
Right.
They can sit with their parents in the same room and speak this street language, and their parents don't even know what they're talking about.
100%.
If I say go and get the strally, you know what I'm talking about?
Me, no.
No, go and get a gun.
Right.
Right? So they can say words like strally.
What was that again?
Strally, strap, meckle, the ting. You can say it, whatever. But they can speak these languages in front of their parents. They can talk about going and getting a key, getting drugs in front of their parents.
Sure.
So there's this huge drift
of
disconnection. So this is where the social media steps in, and then that's where they get exploited. So
and just media in itself, sorry,
and
just to cut you back over there, I mean, if you were to look at the Hollywood productions and a number of movies that actually sensationalize gang life, and promoting it as well, you can imagine these are just factors.
A film about gang life in Peckham, and they were right. So people, gangs were going there to fight each other and find each other and fight each other. Again, we can't blame the film, which is a good point. But the point of the matter is, if we know that people are susceptible for cocaine, but we ban cocaine, don't we?
Right.
We know certain drugs, like certain drugs, cannabis, and mixed with certain synthetics. We understand that these things are bad for people, but we're not going to say, okay, they can take them because that doesn't make you be a bad person. We understand that certain products and certain things are detrimental. And as the doctor said, certain platforms need to be removed through legislation, because this is what's happening. So people who are susceptible, as you said, certain families are born with a propensity for depression or for alcohol. It's genetics.
Right.
So what we do is a progressive and a constructive society tries their best to eliminate these factors for the whole fabric and the cohesion of society and the community.
Understood, loud and clear. Rida?
I think if I could give any advice to the youth, I'd say, in a very simple sense, but probably not to coin a very cheesy Instagram phrase, is to dream big. You have a tool of amazing capacity where you have the ability to reach millions and billions of people. Understand that our history as Muslims, we've been trendsetters, scientists of the highest level. In any area that we've ever entered into, we have created change. You don't have to look too far, 400 years, 1,000 years. Presently, right now, we have a doctor here who's an expert in his field and he's creating change. You as youthful individuals can create change using social media. I'm not talking about just posting up something up for a majlis or posting something up about poetry. I'm saying creating a trend, because that's what the tool is used for. Unfortunately, we have this habit of looking at it in a very simplistic level. It's all about this post and that like and this video and that highlight. It's so much more than that.
Sure.
Individuals in their garages right now in America are making millions and millions of pounds by creating DIY projects which have a whole hub and community of people behind them, because they are taking the step to make a change. We have, in principle, as we all believe, or as I believe as a Shia Muslim, the greatest knowledge has ever descended on this earth to us. We have the fuel, we have all the resources. What is required from us is the action and the elevation of our conscious state to produce. And we've got the platform to do so.
We have the platform to do so. Before I take a question from the crowd, Rida, again, when it comes to Shia presence within mainstream media, many people are of the opinion that, you know what, it's really not worth investing in a Shia television network or in a Shia TV channel, because regardless of what happens, we'll still never be mainstream. What's your opinion in this?
I think...
What's supposed to be our media strategy? Because clearly, as a Shia community, we need to have a PR strategy, we need to have a media strategy when it comes to countering Islamophobia, when it comes to countering gang violence, so on and so forth.
I think that there should be a strategy. Obviously, I think that there are many organizations like the one that we're speaking from at present, which are utilizing what they have in the capacity. But I also think that you need to kind of look at the system that you're working in and work it to the best of its ability. So if you take, for example, Instagram is based around the individual, not around the organization. So if you had, for example, every single person in here right now post up a post on Instagram, that's a lot of posts, a lot of feeds that's going out in one way.
Right.
I think as Shias, we need to understand the tools, what their capacities are, and use them in the way that they've been built to be used.
Sure.
Not use them in a sense of, unfortunately, we're going to do it our way and it will work because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide us.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. You have to study the course. You have to understand what elements you're using, and then you have to apply it.
Of course.
I mean, for example, if we go back into the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he used poetry, to the Arabs.
Right.
Because that was the medium of networking with people. That is what caught people's attention. The medium to capture people's attention is social media, is the imagery you're using, is the photography, it's the videography, it's the tone, it's the color, it's the soundtrack. We need to be engaged in this. I mean, for too long we've told our children, be a doctor, be an accountant, be a lawyer. Let's tell our child to be expressive. The more expression that we have out there,
creativity,
the more image we have out there, the more of a presence we have out there, the less easy it is for someone to say, oh, these people are savages, they're like that, because we've got X amount of information and content online.
Understood. Heard loud and clear. We have a question from the guests, the audience.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
Thank
salam
you
wa
for this brilliant
rahmatullah.
show. For someone who's suffering, well, let's not use suffering because
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, sister, could you
Louder?
speak up, please?
Okay. For someone who's going through loneliness, an excessive amount of loneliness, who kind of goes to social media to feel a sense of belonging or a sense of friendship or community, how can we manage or tackle the excessive use of social media? Someone who's posting just to get likes or get comments because it kind of cures or relieves the sense of loneliness alone. How do we have a balance there?
Sure.
And how does faith, come
Thank
in the
you.
picture?
Yes, it's a very valid and very important question. Many people who use social media are actually lonely, or they might, seek some kind of comfort while speaking to their friends or chatting with their friends or family members if they are living on a different place or a different city. So I think the positive and the controlled use of social media is a key factor here. So rather than excessive use of social media in a negative way, focusing on the interpersonal relationship. So, talking with people, learning from people, and maybe helping people through these platforms, through charities, through educational platforms.
Right.
That will be definitely a very positive aspect of using the social media. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Fantastic.
This is something also I think we alluded to earlier. So without social media, you can't reach out to the world. As you said, dream big. With the use of social media platforms now, we can teach people, as we said, so we teach people in the Middle East, we teach people in Asia and Africa through the use of social media platforms.
Right.
We publicize events, we publicize conferences on social media. What that will attract people. Sometimes, certain educational and other platforms could be used for disseminating knowledge and culture and history.
Of course.
If I could just add to that, Sheikh, if that's possible.
Real quick, but we need to get to Dr. Mohammed.
If possible, obviously I'm not a psychologist of any sort, but I think that in my engagement and my research within social media, I've seen both sides of the argument. So I've seen individuals who suffered from heavy amounts of depression, but through social media, through the community that was available, they were able to feel more whole. They developed a level of self-esteem. They developed better talents. And on the other side, individuals have obviously, unfortunately, committed suicide or gone into self-harm. But from my perspective, from what I understand, because obviously when I'm dealing with these things every single day, I see a massive spectrum of information. As a Muslim, obviously I go back to a core belief principle, but I think it's universal. It's a hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam that says, Man arfa nafsa, faqad arfa rabba. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. So I would encourage people who deal with social media or have social or mental illness problems is to look within inside themselves. I know it's very easy for me to say that. Obviously, seek the necessary help that you need, but develop a relationship with yourself before you start engaging with other people.
Fantastic. Dr. Mohammed?
Hello, just to answer the sister question again. Yes, again, like alcohol is good and bad in it, I believe. For example, in our counseling, my counseling, we use Skype.
Right.
So if someone's feeling lonely and someone's feeling depressed, obviously if they're in another part of the world, we can have a counseling session.
Sure.
You can use WhatsApp for a counseling session if that's what the client wants. So, and you can have social media groups where people who feel they need support, genuine support, can meet in a counseling session, a counseling environment. So we have WhatsApp groups that do that. So yeah, it can be used in that respect in a positive light.
Of course. With all due respect, we've got one more question, but before we come in, with all due respect, this is just my humble opinion. In the sense that if we have a person who's suffering from loneliness, this is my humble opinion, the last thing I would want him is to have access to social media just because I understand there are benefits, but the risks are way too high it's almost like a gamble. For me personally, what I would think is that if a person is suffering from loneliness, the first thing that needs to be done is he or she needs to be put within the right social environment. See, on screen or being behind the keyboard can never, regardless of how good social media is and all the benefits we've had from social media, the technology and everything going forward, hands down, I'm not disputing that. But, social media and Instagram friends cannot be a replacement for real life friends. At the end of the day, I don't know, call me old school, but there's nothing like going out with 5 or 6 of the lads, trying to climb a tree, falling down, playing outside, rather than, me being behind a screen.
One of the issues which perhaps is elephant in the room is there's a lot of Muslims, new Muslims, reverts, converts.
Sure.
And there's a swathe of them who I deal with who become Muslim, they get isolated by their families,
right,
because Islam is seen as this really bad thing that they've done.
Sure.
They've lost, and they get isolated, they feel lonely. But when they go to the masjids, they're not accepted in the madrasas, they're not, the sheikhs are not engaging them properly. So
right,
they get knocked from pillar to post and they feel completely alone and isolated. And this leads to these, they join Facebook groups where it's not sheikhs who are running the Facebook group.
It magnifies the issues.
Tom and Dick and Harry, and this person is just, like the mask. If it's a sister, they might ask about sisters, like just about, do I wear hijab? What about hygiene? All this kind of stuff. What about polygamy? Whatever these issues are, and then these Jack the Lad type people can just tell them any nonsense.
Just because they are not welcomed within the mosque.
Exactly.
And this is what we were saying. Funnily, this is what we were saying last week. The words of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, to paraphrase, where he says, if a person is not your brother in faith, he is your brother in humanity. And the culture that needs to be made is that the followers of Ahlul Bayt, they welcome anyone and everyone. Aslan, race or racial background is not even a question when it comes to the followership of Ahlul Bayt. And you will see, this is why the school of Ahlul Bayt progressed and actually grew even in the most difficult times. You look at the times of, for example, Imam Musa al-Qadim, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. He was in imprisonment in Baghdad, but for the time that he was in imprisonment, Tashayyu was growing at a phenomenally fast rate. They had companions. When you go back to the books of Ilm al-Rijal, for example, you find that Fulan companion of an ex-imam, for example, the Fulan companion of an imam is given the title Kummi or Nishapuri, for example, or Basri. What is this proving? Under the khayma, under the tent of the imam, under the patronage of the imam, you've got somebody from Nishapur, you've got somebody from Qum, you've got somebody from Kufa, you've got somebody from Basra. Different parts of the region, regardless of their ethnic belonging, they are welcomed by the imam, and they all end up becoming, like you rightfully said, trendsetters. In my opinion, I think and this is why, this is my again humble opinion, that our communities need to be highly focused on wilaya of Ahlul Bayt. Because when you are in love with Ahlul Bayt, and when you have understood the school of Ahlul Bayt, the follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen, in the east of the world, in the west of the world, he's no more a follower, he's a trendsetter. Because he's learning from those people who are divinely appointed by Allah Azza wa Jal, infallible, non-violent, and the best for mankind, like the way Allah Azza wa Jal says within the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةً حَسَنَةً. Rasulullah being the best of examples, not only when it comes to our own qualities and characteristics, but on how we should deal with other people. I'll tell you one thing, and I'm pretty sure, I'm going to assume you guys all agree with me because we need to go to a question on the crowd. One of the greatest outstanding characters of the Holy Prophet was compassion. And a lot of the issues that are faced by our youth when it comes to mental health is because the wider community or the infrastructure around them has failed to display compassion towards them.
Can I just add to that as well? I think
add to that, and we need to take a question.
How
How about to put your comments on hold and we take a question first?
Okay, go then.
Take a question first. I think
Question
we've been
from the
waiting
crowd.
for a long time.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
There is, in regards to people acting as spectators when a bad incident is happening. For example, people are getting beaten up and there's just people just on their phones and so forth. Can you justify this being a mental illness for people not acting or helping these type of incidents when people are in danger and just recording and filming in that sense and gaining a crowd in that sense?
Could you speak up? Sorry, I couldn't hear the...
Sorry, the question was, do you find people justifiable or have a mental illness when they're acting as spectators when a bad incident's happening? And say, for example, there's a fight or an argument that's concurring, and you've got spectators that's just recording on their phone and posting on social media. Would you find that classifying as a mental case in that sense? Like, how can people just start recording and posting bad incidents on social media without acting as a hand of help in that sense and going to the cause?
So you mean posting bad or negative incidents on social media?
So I think his question is like, there's actual violence happening in front of them, and the fact that they're standing and recording the violence and then posting it, they themselves have some sort of propensity towards violence.
So I think he's asking why is that a mental illness?
Is that a mental illness, yeah or not? I mean, it doesn't specify any type of mental illness. I mean, some people might have what we call it. I mean, this is not a normal behavior. This is not a pro-social behavior that we would encourage, sort of a healthy behavior. In a way, you should have, intervened. Maybe you should have stopped. This is something private between, the incident, the parties involved in the incident. So posting something like that on social media is not a healthy behavior. I wouldn't call it a mental illness per se, but it's not.
You wouldn't categorize this as
a mental
propensity
illness.
Towards violence, for example.
Well, maybe.
Or seeking pleasure from violence. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. You don't know. I mean, just by posting on Facebook or social media, it doesn't mean that you are, condoning or maybe have a propensity towards violence. You might have a mental illness, but again, from that snapshot, that short video clip, it doesn't tell you a lot, but it tells you something like this person is not. Yeah, doesn't have a healthy. I would say
he's got something to pick on over here, if you don't mind. So, for example, if I just extend the argument forward, we all remember in the media a couple of years back, when you had all these terrorist groups coming out, for example, and ISIS, what used to happen is you used to have them videoing executions. And then all of these were put on Facebook. And I remember there was a documentary about this a couple of years back. And it was a documentary here in London. And there were execution videos where people were watching. They were actually watching it on a laptop while they was eating pizza. So you can imagine. Now, my point over here is this. I mean, the fact that you have somebody beheading somebody in the name of religion, that is a catastrophe. But then the fact that you have an entire camera crew that is willing to watch this, they're willing to record it and then put in the graphics, graphic effects and so on and so forth. Now, my question over here is that this person behind the camera himself, surely he has to be suffering from some sort of mental health?
Yeah, I would say this is what we call it a dissocial or antisocial, personality.
Right.
If he's supporting this violence and he's actually enjoying it, yes,
right.
He's definitely not.
Let me
not
push
normal.
the argument a little bit more. Gaining pleasure or using violence as a form of entertainment. Does that lead to anything? Indicate mental health?
Yeah, it is related to poor mental health. I think globally speaking or largely speaking, I think we are talking about someone with what we call it a personality disorder,
right.
Antisocial, somebody who's not coping, who's not integrating well in the community. So
I fail to understand.
He gains the pleasure or he gains the gratification from posting these pictures. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Before we jump into you, Dr. Mohammed.
Yes, again, echoing what the doctor's saying very well. I believe it's a form of voyeurism. And it's...
You classify this as a mental health issue?
Again, it's a complex one, but what
but
it is...
why is it complex? I can't understand. The person's taking pleasure from violence.
If you look at group dynamics,
He's entertained by the violence.
It's not healthy, as I said.
Yeah, it's not healthy. It's basically people who derive pleasure, gratification from looking at someone else in a very difficult position. It's like a group mentality, group think. It's everybody it's just like lynchings back in America in the 1930s, you know, like the whole town would turn out to see this guy getting lynched from a tree.
Right.
But it's highly subjective because, I mean, for example, you're taking this image of this one video, but we all pay to watch pay-per-view boxing. We pay to watch UFC, but it's violence. We'll watch Netflix and we would no problem watching Jack the Ripper tear someone up.
This is exactly what I'm saying.
But I'm saying
does that mean I'm suffering from some sort of mental health issue?
No.
Because I'm sitting in View Cinema with popcorn watching a horror movie.
You're just being desensitized. You're just being desensitized to the pain of another person.
I think
and so when you play these games, to me, when you play these games like Fortnite and all these games which are based around you just going around killing virtual people all day long, and then when you speak to your friend, I killed that guy, I killed that dude. Like, obviously, I'm not saying that makes you go and kill people, but it's all this desensitization, as you said. Every Hollywood movie, if you look at every poster in a Hollywood movie, James Bond, they've all got a gun, a weapon of some type. Harry Potter will have his wand, waving his wand. Doctor Who will have his sonic screwdriver. Sure. It's always some type of weaponry or something phallic to sort of say, look, you know, it's about power, it's about control. So a lack of control. So I think people feel lack of control. So these things give them a form of control in some way where they can go around feeling good that they've slaughtered a lot of people on Fortnite.
Some sense of apparent empowerment.
Empowerment, yeah, but it's all virtual.
Great. Doctor,
maybe,
before we come to, sorry, my brother.
It might give them some sense of empowerment or maybe some sense of pleasure. I think it's a way of releasing tension and stress. I mean, if you're watching these videos or these images with interest, this is a way of achievement for some people.
Like a beheading is releasing stress?
Oh, no, this is...
he's talking about ISIS videos,
This is extreme. So we're talking about something like maybe if you're doing a video game, playing a video game or watching boxing or something of like in a way, not a severe violence or not a terrorist attack.
Have you seen Fortnite? Have you played Fortnite?
No.
It's horrific.
No. So, yeah.
Is it GT4, one of those games?
I need to even Google these names.
So, you don't want to watch them, but
I mean,
it's like head splattering and like
if you seek pleasure or if you enjoy these behaviors or these scenes, there is definitely an element of a mental problem.
Of course. Yeah. Rather, platform's yours.
Obviously, I can't argue with the doctor. He's a doctor. I'm just a general person within the media. But I think that they're playing to our innate elements within inside us spiritually. I think that we kind of miss that. I mean, I'm not saying that the output is correct. I'm not saying that what we're visualizing is correct. But it entices us. We're interested in it. I mean, I'm sure that everyone in this room has watched a violent film at least once in their life, or a horrible horror film or a graphic scene, and they were interested to see what would happen because it plays on us innately. We innately have the want of certain desires, whether spiritually, physically, or mentally. The ability to reappropriate, to be married, or to be with a partner, the ability to get angry, the ability to get hungry. These are innate things inside us. So when we see things like that, they reflect those elements in us. I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to bring down the concept of the religion, but even within elements of our religion, there are tendencies which require bravery. We don't call it violence, we call it bravery within that aspect. So, for example, when Ali ibn Abi Talib is mentioned to have killed 50% of the people in the Battle of Badr, we don't go, that's absolutely horrific, how could he do that? We commend him and we write poetry about it. But it is, in principle, a battle.
Understood that the battles happen in self-defense.
Absolutely, but they were still...
the battles or the violence was
But the
violence
poetry
that
we
was
speak
aggressive.
about says, oh, Ali, with your sword, you did this, you did that.
Courage.
We call it courage. But if we take Ali out of the equation and put John in there and put him on Braveheart and say, well, that's violence. But innately, it's playing on the same principle.
Karbala, what happened at Karbala, about human beings seeing an atrocity unparalleled and feeling that pain and that, some of the soldiers themselves in the army of Yazid were like, oh my, no, this is horrific.
Absolutely.
So you have that thing where...
but we still
have that duality,
bravery,
but we're supposed to ascend to a spiritual call and not just, hovel and remain in that kind of like that base nature.
Absolutely.
And I think this what happens, this social media to a degree can just constantly keep us affecting our endorphins for constant pleasure and keeping us in a baser state of certain libidinal energy, which is negative. And I think that's the problem with it. Whereas
it has that capacity.
So I agree with what you're saying that.
From.
But can I just add to this another point as well? I think we also have to look at the fact that I work with people who are transgender and people who are considered sub-gay. And these issues, we get asked issues at my center, like for example, I'm a Muslim sister. I've got a gay Muslim friend, and he clearly doesn't like women. So can I not show my can I take my hijab off in front of him because he won't find me attractive? And you find a lot of these people with these. Some people, I don't know. Some people, I wouldn't say it's a mental illness, but some people may say that. But the thing is, they don't feel when they go to the masjids or when they go to Islamic cultural centers that there's that love you talked about from the Ahlul Bayt. You know, there's that compassion that you talked about.
Of course.
They just get, you know, they may be told, oh, you're evil, this is wrong, and all this type of stuff.
Right.
Now, obviously, I'm not getting into the rights or wrongs of homosexuality.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that
the manner in which guidance is delivered is very, very
it's very
important.
key. So what's
Of
happened, a lot
course.
of these people are suicidal because they go into these social groups and they say, okay, I'm gay and I'm looking for support, maybe in a Muslim reverts group. But then somebody comes in with something like, stop for Allah, sister or brother,
Right.
you should go to hellfire. The people of Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah. So,
Right.
so once again, it's the scholars, the Aima, those with the Ijaza, need to also grapple with this issue of how we
course.
can effectively use social media to pick up on people who feel isolated, who feel marginalized, and feel there
100%.
isn't a place of love for them. You know, where they
Definitely,
can go.
I think we're definitely going to have a segment on social media and religion just by itself because of the complexities. But
very
Reda,
quickly
for you
on
to
that
finish
point.
your point so I can summarize.
Obviously, the principle is that our religion should hold the premise for everything that we do. And any of these elements that were mentioned about violence or kind of endangering ourselves in mental issues, we should refer back to them as the highest premise and understand the context of what they were on. Obviously, just before, I wasn't trying to equate Imam Ali alayhi salam with any normal
100%,
individual.
But I
was just
understand where
working
somebody
aspect.
from a third, I can understand
Yeah.
where somebody from a third party
We see
would
the
come back and
innate
throw the
aspect of-
argument back
yeah.
at us, playing as a devil's
Yeah.
advocate. 100%, I agree with that. Your final take on this issue, and it gives me time to wrap up for tonight's show.
I think obviously we've learned a lot from the doctor and the other brother as well in regards to these elements. I think, like I said, know yourself and you'll know who you are, what you're able to achieve,
Man
and
arafa
project
nafsa faqad
فقد عرف
arafa
ربه,
rabbah.
and then
Ahsant.
project that to the world. And I'm sure you'll put out a positive message.
Fantastic. It's been a great 1 hour. I think the time's even passed faster than we expected. We have a lot of things that we wanted to discuss. We didn't get through everything over here. But for the sake of a conclusion, over here, what I would like to say is that to wrap up, for tonight's show, in the correlationship between social media and mental health, I think what we have been able to successfully identify between our expert group of panels over here is that, number one, family environment is absolutely important. The tarbiyah, the upbringing which is given by the mother and the father to the children on how to deal with social media, educating them about the right constructive manner of social media, that is absolutely important. Number two, we need to take steps within our local mosques, within our Hussainiyas, within our Imam Bargas, to ensure that we educate people about mental health in order to solve the mental health issues that are faced by the youth. The conversation does not only have to be directed towards the youth, but needs to be directed to the parents as well. Parents and the generation before us need to be absolutely informed and aware of mental health in order to help not only themselves, but the coming generation. And the last but not least is legislation. I think it is important that as a Muslim community, we all play an important role in making sure that the right legislation is used in order to protect any sort of misuse of social media. Again, when it comes to social media, we're going to leave the conclusion up to our viewers. Is it the tool or the manner in which the tool that is used? What is to blame? We will leave that up. However, I must say one thing before we end. Ahibba'i, the values taught to us by Ahlul Bayt are absolutely important. When it comes to raising a family, what does Imam Sadiq say? What does Imam al-Baqir say? The more and more we govern our decisions on how to use social media, on how to raise our families, the more and more we go back to the schools of Ahlul Bayt, the more and more we can protect ourselves. When it comes to mental health, seeking counseling, taking medication when necessary is absolutely important, but in our belief, faith is also important. Your belief and your love for Ahlul Bayt and Amirul Mu'mineen will be able to get you through the most difficult of times that a person may go through. Having said this, I would like to thank all our guests on this panel. Thank you very much, and thank you to our live audience as well. Inshallah, we look forward to seeing you next week on Thursday Night Talk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.